You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, just a few days ago, we saw Danielle Sassoon resign from the DOJ after she was pushed by Emil Bove to drop charges against Eric Adams. Then just yesterday, we saw Hagen Scotton do the exact same thing. And so we're seeing more and more of these prosecutors stand up to the Trump administration and Emil Bove and Donald Trump as they try to push the DOJ to do their corrupt bidding. How much of a problem is this for the Justice Department moving forward? The fact that these prosecutors, who are usually very content to fall in line or at least not make themselves the center of attention, are coming out increasingly and not just speaking out, but issuing these public rebukes to the administration.
Yeah, Brian, it ain't good for the Justice Department and it ain't good for the American people. These are honest, ethical, hardworking public servants. We now have 7 who have resigned. These are principled, righteous resignations rather than do the dirty work of Donald Trump and his former criminal defense attorneys who are now, among the leadership ranks at the Department of Justice. It's bad all the way around. Now, it may be in keeping with Donald Trump's plan to try to hollow out the good people from the Department of Justice and repopulate it with sycophants and lapdogs and flunkies, so maybe they feel like, they're winning on this front, but Brian, the American people are losing. And as you say, the latest resignation came from a federal prosecutor, Hagen Scotton. First of all, who is Hagen Scotton? Well, he's not only a career federal prosecutor, he's a former Army Special Forces officer who won 2 Bronze Stars and who, get this, clerked for Chief Justice Roberts on the Supreme Court, not to mention he clerked for Justice Kavanaugh before he became a Supreme Court justice. Hard to paint him as an angry Democrat, though I'm sure Trump and company will try. So basically, he was the lead prosecutor on the Mayor Eric Adams case. And as you mentioned just a few days ago, the U.S. attorney who the Trump administration put in place in the Manhattan Federal Prosecutor's Office, Danielle Sassoon, was directed to dismiss the Eric Adams prosecution. She said, hell no, I'm not doing it. It wouldn't be ethical. That's my characterization of her lengthy letter to the Attorney General, saying I'm not doing it, but if you continue to try to force me to do it, I will resign. That is a righteous resignation. The lead prosecutor, Mr. Scotton, said, you know what? There has been some indication that I refused to dismiss the case, but you know what? U.S. Attorney Sassoon didn't even ask me to because she knew it was wrong. But let me tell you, she was right in her refusal to dismiss a case that is strong on the evidence, a case of corruption by the mayor of New York City. And frankly, I would not have done it either. And here is what he says, sort of the next to last line in his letter of resignation. He said, if no lawyer is within earshot of the president who is willing to give him the advice that this is the wrong thing to do, then I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion to dismiss, but it was never going to be me. That is the stuff of heroic public servants when asked to do something unethical, corrupt, indeed, perhaps criminal. Maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. He said, hell no, and I'm resigning as a matter of principle and conscience. And we, I have a feeling, Brian, are going to see more and more and more of those kind of righteous resignations.
And I want to dig into the fact that, as we see more of these people self-select out, and they're doing it, to your exact point, for a virtuous reason, the reality of the situation is that those people who weren't willing to do corrupt bidding are no longer in positions where they can take that stand, and they will inevitably be replaced by people who will. And so I just want you to walk us through why taking these stands, why resigning is more impactful than staying in and trying to fight from the inside. Because, we've spoken about this a lot. I'm split, not entirely convinced on the virtue of these folks resigning and coming out and taking a public stand, when the reality is that they prevent themselves from being in a position of power where they can actually enact change from the inside.
Brian, these people would not be in a position of power for long, because if they had not resigned, they would absolutely be fired. It would be a wrongful termination. And then, of course, they would have the pleasure of spending the next year or two in court fighting the Trump administration over a wrongful termination. So what they do is they resign for matters of principle and conscience, and they expose the corruption inside Donald Trump's Department of Justice. So listen, we have all heard that, when the dictator is trying to rise to power, the autocrat is trying to take over government, don't obey in advance. I do not fault these people for saying, I will not obey your unethical, perhaps unlawful command to dismiss a righteous case against a high public official. So I am resigning. I don't begrudge them. I don't criticize them and say, no, that's obeying in advance. You must stay in place and wait to be wrongfully fired and then spend the next couple of years in court fighting that wrongful termination rather than moving on to your next professional endeavor, which hopefully, Brian, as you and I do every day, involves fighting the corruption in a new way from the outside, not necessarily from the inside.
Glenn, in Hagen Scotton's letter, he said that eventually you'll find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to actually do what neither I nor Danielle Sassoon was willing to do in dismiss the charges, the well-founded charges against Eric Adams. They eventually did find someone who was willing to sign off on this dismissal, but it wasn't really as cut and dry as it seems. Can you explain what happened there?
Yeah, Brian, this is a really interesting development. So yesterday, they did find somebody at the Department of Justice Public Integrity Section to sign the motion to dismiss. His name is Edward Sullivan, but let's not leap to a conclusion that he's a fool or a coward. Here's why. The reporting is that somebody who is a fool, a coward, who appears to be corrupt because he's the one directing this, corrupt dismissal of Eric Adams' case, a guy named Emile Beauvais. There's reporting that he sat down with all of the prosecutors in the Public Integrity Section. There are about 25 or 30 prosecutors strong, and told them somebody's going to sign this motion, or my take on the reporting, there will be hell to pay. You may all be retaliated against. And the reporting is further that he dangled the promotion in front of the person who might be willing to put their name on a corrupt motion to dismiss. So what we see in the motion to dismiss that was filed in this case yesterday is it was signed indeed by Edward Sullivan as senior litigation counsel, basically the prosecutor who has now entered the case. It was also signed by a supervisory official named Antoinette Bacon, and notably at the very bottom, after there was this certification that, yes, we are directing this motion to dismiss be filed, it is signed by Emile Beauvais, the guy who has been orchestrating this entire corrupt episode. And he is somebody who hopefully will be held to account someday, because let me just do this real quick. If I were a prosecutor in a case and I told the defendant, you know what, I will dismiss your case if you help me with my political endeavors. The defendant agrees, and then I say, I'm moving to dismiss the case. You know what that is, Brian? That's a conspiracy, that's obstruction of justice, and that's bribery. It's me using my official position for personal gain. So I suggest that what I've seen here is potentially criminal, and the Beauvais of the world will have to be held accountable. But let's go back to Edward Sullivan, who was apparently the first one to sign his name to this corrupt dismissal. The reporting is that Edward Sullivan is potentially retirement eligible. Maybe he has one foot out the door of the Department of Justice. And what I've heard in the reporting, though I haven't seen any named people step up, it's anonymous sources, say he basically took one for the team. He said, listen, I've heard Emile Beauvais threaten everybody with retaliation. If somebody doesn't sign it, I'm going to step up and sign it. That feels like somebody falling on their sword to protect all of the younger colleagues. If that reporting holds, it doesn't look like Edward Sullivan was a fool or a coward. It looks like he took one for the team.
Well, look, the reality is that there is a lot to watch in this space as these class action suits continue to pile up, and as these folks in the DOJ, which I mentioned before, are generally content to quietly toe the line, or generally content not to make themselves the center of attention, continue to speak out against this administration. If you're looking for the beginnings of chinks in the armor, these are the ingredients that lead to exactly that. A lot of Donald Trump's power is derived from this idea that no one is willing to speak out, that he is able to quash dissent, and that is not what he's doing at all right now. He's actually engendering more of it. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.